it's very unlikely that you're going to have a conversation with somebody who has a different political opinion than you, and they are just going to immediately start calling you a Nazi to your face. But online, yeah, it's true. I mean, that sort of thing does happen.
How'd you get started with Upworthy? Tell me your backstory.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I couldn't agree with you more. And Upworthy's mission has always been to get people to pay attention to what matters, and those more aspirational feelings of togetherness and love and joy, and has shown up on various platforms over the years. I would imagine maybe you're referring to the Facebook days.
You guys kind of invented clickbait, but like in a really well-meaning, well-intentioned way.
That's right. And I mean, it's not something that I shy away from talking about. I was not personally involved with the invention of clickbait, though I would take credit for it if I were. But the idea was to, use the systems that were at work, for the betterment of humanity. So if people are more drawn to clicking on something in a certain way, well, put stuff in front of them that's worth paying attention to, and use those systems to your own advantage. Of course, it became a bit different once the Washington Post and the New York Times started editing their headlines to be a little more clicky, and I think it got a little out of hand at one point, probably.
Yeah, but I mean, like, one of the, I think, fundamental questions of our time is how to strike a more healthful balance between the content that we consume and the impact that content is potentially having on our collective mental health. And so often I think social media, it drives you to click on content that's not always the most productive and helpful. And at least you guys were out there trying to attract attention to positive and uplifting stories, which I assume is what forms the basis for your book.
Yeah, that's correct. And, for better or worse, there are just ways that the brain is hardwired to react to things. And there are certain emotional triggers that are very strong that are hard to ignore. And I think people can rely on them as a crutch sometimes to get people to pay attention to something. And, I'm very proud of the fact that we try to focus on, positive attributes. And I think it's an important thing to be dedicated to.
The impact that reading positive stories can have on one's health, I think, is significant. And people were talking about it today, right? The negative impact of loneliness and chronic stress is pervasive, burnout is pervasive. And you guys, I think, in a way, offer a kind of antidote to that.
Yeah. And, what I was going to say is I don't fault anybody for using whatever tools are at their disposal to get people to pay attention to what they want them to pay attention to. But, the truth is, it is a lot easier to make someone angry and condition a response in that way than it is to inspire them or convey a sense of awe or joy or laughter. And I think that's why you see so much anger in some ways. It's not necessarily, and I don't have the data to back this up, but it's not necessarily that people are really angry and they want to make people angry. It's that sometimes it's just the easiest thing to do, and it's the path of least resistance. And so you have to take a conscious approach if you don't want to go down that road to saying, okay, I'm going to work to try to communicate in a way that may be a little more difficult, but the importance of it is the ramifications of it really matter in terms of how it affects people, just as you were talking about.
Yeah. So Upworthy, obviously a digital-first company. What inspired you to create Good People, the book?
So Good People, I have to backtrack a little bit back to the creation of the Instagram handle at Upworthy. We did not have really much of a presence on Instagram at all several years ago, shortly before the pandemic. And, I thought it was an interesting place to play around and explore. And it started with Lucia and I, my co-creator of this book, basically just coming up with a really effective place to catalog and bookmark examples of decency in the world. And we started doing that because it was something that we needed to see ourselves. And Instagram is a very effective tool for that. It's you can, if you ever find yourself finding an account that you like and scroll through, and they've been dedicated to a particular mission or approach or viewpoint, just going through it is like a very enjoyable experience. And then we found, particularly during the pandemic, which is when our account began to really explode in size, was that this was something that other people needed to see as well. People wanted to see proof points that there was human decency out there, particularly during a time when folks were fighting over toilet paper in Costco. The counter narrative was very important. So we learned pretty quickly that we were filling an important role in people's lives. The book came about because over time, we just kept staying dedicated to our mission, and we created a space. Something special happened where I think people started feeling comfortable there. They looked to us as a friend, someone who is an ever-present, not Pollyanna, outlook on the world, but someone who had a outlook that made them feel better about things. There was a certain sense of vulnerability on the page, and people felt comfortable sharing stories of their own. And we would see this take place organically. We would post something about, a friend doing something nice for another friend, or a teacher who stepped up in a really remarkable way. And then in the comments, you would see people being like, this reminds me of the time when. And I thought that was so interesting and powerful, more powerful than even the content we were sharing, to know that these are real people out there and they were being affected by what we were sharing. So we decided to kind of take a more conscious approach to eliciting those reactions from people, asking questions, what's a time you experienced kindness from a stranger? Who's that teacher who changed your life? What's something small that happened that someone did for you that you'll never forget? These kind of evocative questions, I think, take someone to a place where they immediately remember something. And we started again doing that because we just liked reading them. And we liked the feeling that they had. And then that turned into eventually the book because we thought that they needed to be preserved forever. The feeling that they instilled in us was powerful. Other people really liked it. And the nature of social media is ephemeral. It's there at one moment and it's gone the next. It's a funny thing because the stuff that you don't want to live forever on the internet is always there for people to find. But that one thing that you're like, God, that really inspired me. What was that beautiful thing that someone wrote, or that one post? And if you didn't bookmark it or use the tools at your disposal, you may never find it again. And so we thought a book would be the best way to treat these stories with the respect that they deserved for the power that they hold.
So the book was birthed from the Instagram account?
Yes, it was birthed from the comment section. We would ask these questions, and we would read through thousands and thousands and thousands of responses from people. We would see which ones had the seeds of, what could be a really great story, because, this isn't a book full of Instagram comments. It's a book of short stories. And to see which ones that, probably had the foundation for a story that could be told in a slightly longer format, we would reach out to those people. We would ask them, hey, we're doing this project where we want to compile people's stories about their experiences with the best of humanity. Would you like to be a part of it? An overwhelming amount of people jumped at the opportunity, which I'm so grateful for, because this is full of, people sharing very intimate details of their lives, very profound moments, and also, funny and goofy things that just stuck with them as well. And we went through that process hundreds of times, crafted the best ones, and arranged it by theme according to those questions, and that's how this book came about.
That's so cool. What message do you have for people today that are tired of the, because social media, this is like the exception to the rule. I feel like these stories of positivity from the front lines of social media. I think most people today would describe social media as a really vitriolic place, as a really the whole concept of doom scrolling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is. I don't think you're going to get a resounding like, wow, I can't wait to spend a bunch of time on social media because every time I walk away from it, I feel great. But it is also a tool. right? And it depends on how you use it. The problem with that, of course, is that there are forces at work that are much more powerful than any individual person. Algorithms written for engagement tied to monetization. And so, we're all players in a huge landscape that's built around, these companies staying in business and the monetization of attention. But there are still things under your control, you can consciously decide what information is coming at you and see if you can curate that more effectively. And I think it starts with taking stock of how you're feeling after you use social. And if you find yourself not feeling great, sit and think about where that feeling is coming from. Is it coming from the social comparison? Is it coming from exposure to information that you have no control over that leaves you feeling hopeless? If so, there are multiple paths to take. You can take a break. You can, decide to deactivate your account, or you can see, well, what resources, what accounts are out there that are providing a counter narrative about people. Upworthy is one of those accounts. It was a novel thing when we were building it several years ago. Now there are plenty of accounts that kind of take this positive view to curation and original content. Look for them and see how it makes you feel.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In our world, in the nutrition, health, and wellness space, it's unfortunate, but the content that seems to get the most traction typically is content that is more fear-mongery. I think there's a real call-out culture now on social media, which I think is really gross. So yeah, it is comforting to know, because social media still is a really, I think, important tool for people, entrepreneurs, people looking to create or grow their businesses. It's really comforting to know that you can still gain traction on social media without having to, take the low road, so to speak.
Oh yeah, I mean, and I'm sure you experience this in the world of health and wellness and diets and stuff, but like sometimes the most outrageous version of something will get the most attention. You're like, wait, I can't exist solely on a diet of pickled turnips or whatever the latest fad may be. And it's just like the same thing as with content. It's like there's not, people have to subscribe to a particularly, militant view on something being right or wrong. And there's not a ton of room for nuance because of the format a lot of the times. And so maybe it's not the place you go for that. Maybe it's the place you go for other things that make you feel good about the world. The majestic, vistas of nature, the people having philosophical discussions that are really easy to digest. Pets, the memes that you want to share with people. I mean, that's a great way to connect with folks. Yeah. And it's full of that. So that's what I mean by taking stock. It's like, are you being drawn to the negative center of gravity? Or are you consciously trying to move towards the resources that are available that leave you feeling a little bit better about things?
Do you think that social media do you think it's possible for our actions on social media to have a ripple effect that then lead to larger changes in society?
Absolutely. I mean, in the most immediate practical sense that comes to mind, I hope this book, for example, is an example of that in the real world, where perhaps that somebody's, moment of sharing something about their life was read by the right people and then made its way into a book, and that book will make its way into people's hands. And, that might change the way people see the world as a result. And that's not true. That's not just true for writing. That's true for anything. Any idea can take hold. That's also the unbelievable power of social media, is that any idea can take hold, right? And ripple. And so I think, we have to be very conscious about what are the ideas that we're putting out there? What are the ideas that we're taking in? Because they absolutely do affect how you see the world.
Yeah. I remember when I was first getting started, my first job out of college was working for Current TV. Do you remember that?
I do. I remember Current. That was with Al Gore, right?
Yeah, it was the Al Gore project. Yeah. So I was one of the main hosts and producers for that network. And at that time, the example that comes to mind that I think was the most, that generated the most noise on social media was it called the Egyptian Spring? There was like
the Arab Spring.
The Arab Spring, yes. And it felt like this was a real linchpin moment for humanity, where people, marginalized communities, people who have been under the influence of tyranny and authoritarian regimes were able to rise up against the government in this really novel way, empowered by technology. And that to me, that stands out as being historically like a really important moment for social media. But today, when I think about social media, I just think it's all like there's so much noise on it. It's like it's a big problem. And then there's the addictive aspect to it, the fact that it's designed by people who have essentially no background in human psychology other than knowing how to stimulate dopamine and keep a person hooked on their app for as long as possible. And it just feels like it's kind of gone a bit downhill, but I feel like you guys are in the trenches, and it gives me optimism. Is your background technology? Is that what your background is, or was it more writing? Or
my background? No, my background is, although I do come from most recently before this, the startup world. But before that, I was doing music, and then before that, I was working in Hollywood, and before that, I was, a student studying political science and writing my thesis on Al Qaeda's strategy and engaging the West. So the one thread between that is I've always been fascinated by how you get people to pay attention to things, and particularly how you use systems to your advantage for the right reasons. I feel like I've always been a bit of an empath and wanted to help, people feel a little bit better if I can, and feel better myself as a result. And so that's something I've worked towards. But you raised an interesting point earlier where you talked about the noise of social media, and I think it's very true. It's I've been thinking about this concept of digital pollution, right? And, which is a term that I've seen used when it comes to the idea of like digital billboards and lights and stuff around, and like, oh, there's like, there's, or crypto's effect on the environment, right? But not in the sense of what is going on in the digital world. And it's interesting, I think, because many of us maybe spend an outsized amount in these digital environments, perhaps more there than in the real world. And yet there's very little attention paid to the pollution that's happening there. I kind of feel like when I open up the app, sometimes it's like I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, and it's kind of like stepping into 1988 Los Angeles. When I open up the app, it's just like, whoa, where's this haze? What am I looking at? And if anybody wants to know what I'm talking about, just look on YouTube for Game 1 of the World Series in 1988, and you'll see. And it's hard to navigate. You're instantly overwhelmed. Maybe you're fed things that just isn't good for you. And I think just like pollution, it has a real physiological and mental effect that can not necessarily be great for you. And when we think about, the amount of concerted effort that has gone on to improve and protect and shepherd our natural world so that we can thrive in concert with it. And we're certainly not there by any means. There's huge issues that we're struggling with, but there has been legislation, right? There have been companies who put that at the forefront of what they do. There are individuals who make their purchasing habits based on what a company says that they are doing for the environment. Where is this happening in the digital world? Where is, the efforts from the government to set guardrails about what is acceptable and what is not in terms of speech, but just in how the systems function, right? So we don't have the equivalent of, you read like Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, or, you hear about like, oh, the river in Cleveland lit on fire. And that was a seminal moment. It's like, well, we got to do something. I think, there are areas in the social media world where the river is on fire. And so we need to have a concerted effort from the top down, from the individual to the companies, to the government, that kind of takes this as seriously as it should, because it's a place where we're spending a lot of time. And so it affects us as such.
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally more in favor of less regulation, but I think when it comes to, and certainly, I'm a big proponent of free speech, but yeah, 100%, in the same way that it's kind of crazy what the food industry has been able to get away with, to the extent that now your average supermarket is packed with 73% ultra-processed foods that we know are at the foundation of the obesity epidemic, the epidemic of non-communicable disease. There has to be something in place, for these digital companies, because they've just become so powerful in their ability to steer the conversation,
right,
and the ability to surface certain things and algorithmically promote certain kinds of content that we know are not helpful to mental health.
Yeah.
Against the context of a mental health pandemic, really. It's not just something that's affecting us here in the United States. I mean, this is something that's like increasingly around the world. People are experiencing burnout at unprecedented rates. So, I mean, if the government, I don't know what the solution is, but...
I don't know what the solution is either, but I think it starts by having a conversation about things. And, by no means am I saying, hey, government, it's your responsibility to figure this stuff out. And I don't think that's the case. But, when you think about, well, how were workers treated at some point before there were workplace regulations to help keep people safe, or food? I mean, what, as bad as things are, what would it look like without the FDA, right? I'm sure you have an opinion on this.
Yeah, I mean, the FDA isn't exactly the most helpful. I think the food industry ultimately has, they have as close as you could get to free reign. And I think that part of that has to do with the fact that the FDA is just very friendly with
right.
corporations.
Yeah, well, that's another issue. Or, the Clean Water Act to preserve, the waterways. And there are all, we can always point to like, well, the water's still polluted in these places, or the food is still messed up. But in general, there are steps, I think, in the right direction that are a product of conversations that need to be had. And, there's a mental health epidemic going on. The Surgeon General came out and wrote an op-ed about calling for the idea of warnings on social media for the effect that it has
I hadn't heard that.
on
Wow.
people. And, so these are the beginnings of a conversation like that. But, I don't think, I don't view social media is like cigarettes in a way that needs a warning label. It's, a product of technology, and it's the industrial revolution in terms of its impact. And, it's the technological, social media, digital revolution. And just like you wouldn't say, okay, well, we need to get rid of the steam engine because it can hurt people. You'd be like, okay, we need to figure out how to use this as effectively as possible. And I think that the potential is massive for the betterment of humanity. But again, just as the individual needs to think about a conscious way to engage, so does every other strata in society.
Totally. What's your relationship with social media like?
It's funny because I communicate with so many people every day. The Upworthy account, it fluctuates, but we reach as many as 75, 100 million people a month.
Wow.
1 million engagements a day sometimes. And so I'm constantly thinking about it. Personally, I am not engaging all that much, like posting too many details about my personal life. But I take a look at what people are sharing and what they're doing, and, where the trends are going, because I need to stay informed about that. But I've always been on it. I have all the accounts. I take a look at what's going on. But I think just like anybody else, I have a struggle, especially having to be, plugged into it. And I'm less so now. in terms of the day-to-day management of the channel. And I'm incredibly grateful for the people who have to be in the trenches. But I too, take stock of how I'm feeling. And if I have to unplug, I get out. I'll go to a place with no reception for, as many days as I can afford.
I leave my phone in my gym locker sometimes. I feel like when I go to the gym, it's like me time, And I don't always do this, but I will occasionally, when I'm feeling particularly too online, I'll lock my phone in the gym locker, and I'm always grateful. I've never regretted doing that, which is, I think, I think we need to. I think it's would be quite helpful for most people to build in periods of their day where they're literally unable to engage.
Yeah, or we just come up with the idea, maybe we shut off the internet 1 year, and then the next year we have it on, and then we can remember what it's like to live without it. That's not a serious suggestion, but
well, have you been to a comedy club lately where when you go into some of these comedy clubs? Like I went recently to Comedy Mothership in Austin, Texas, which is Joe Rogan's new comedy epicenter, which is an amazing place, and I don't think it's unique in doing this. I think other comedy clubs have implemented this, but they give you these cases where you put your phone in. Your phone is essentially locked in this case that you have with you on your person, and you're unable to remove it from the case until you're exiting the club.
Right.
Which I think it's like, and that was really cool, actually.
I think I heard about these cases being used in schools too. And how quickly kids were able to figure out how to open them with a paperclip or whatever it may be. If we want the solution to any problem out there, it's keep a phone away from a 14-year-old and see what it takes to get it back. It'd be okay, we need a solution to carbon emissions. That's the only way you're getting your phone back, and we might have that solved.
Yeah, seriously.
But it's interesting. There's a whole ecosystem of things that are springing up around that. I heard about a company that bricks your phone at a fundamental level when you leave the house, and you can only unbrick it by tapping the device. And these seem like pretty drastic things. I would hope that it wasn't that there were ways to change our relationship that didn't require such a militant way of bettering your relationship to the platform. But that's why I try to think of three things that I can do personally, and that anyone listening can do to take stock of their relationship. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, or even just to catalog things, which is to balance first and foremost. I call them the 3 Bs: balance, broaden, and beautify. But the balance is take a look at how you're feeling after engaging. And if it's not great, think about if there's a way to balance the media and the accounts that you're following. Get rid of some of the stuff that's not making you feel great. Add some more things that do. And then take that into the real world. If it's not making you feel great, then get off, go for a walk, leave the phone behind, go to the gym, like you said, and leave it in the locker, and take some time to digest, what it's like to, actually be alive in the world and to see things. And I think that's really important too, because, we have this heightened state of anxiety sometimes through the material that we're exposed to. And sometimes it affects our worldview. And sometimes it's difficult to tell, is this the way the world really is? Or is this just the information that I'm being fed about it constantly through a screen? And so I think, when you think about the things that are heightening your anxiety or making you angry, think about, okay, is this coming through a screen all the time, or is it coming through my real life interactions? And that's why it can be important to balance, take a step and go out into the real world and be like, oh, wait, people are way nicer than maybe I thought. I see, keep an open eye to the goodness that is out there. And then don't get into a hole, broaden your perspectives, try to follow accounts that have a different point of view of your own, which I think is incredibly important, because not every person out there may have a different perspective in a way that is easy to dismiss. And I think it's really important to consciously look for that, particularly if, the algorithm isn't feeding it to you. And a lot of times this happens in the comment section. In general, the old adage is avoid the comments. Don't read the comments. At Upworthy, we're incredibly proud to have built the kind of kindest comment section on the internet. But there's a lot of really great discussion happening. And sometimes even when people are arguing, there might be someone who comes in with a point that reaches you in a way that's understanding, in a way that's not just about it stoking as much anger as possible. And so sometimes it can be a good exercise to look at what people are saying and to see if any of it kind of cuts through the noise a bit. And then finally, beautify. Like I said earlier, look for those accounts that are sharing things that leave you feeling better. The nature, the pets, the whatever it may be. It's personal to each individual person. Whatever is out there that isn't a thief of joy, the kind of thing that just leaves you feeling more ground down as opposed to lifted up. And they're out there, and there are people doing it that are dedicated to sharing that sort of stuff. Upworthy is one of them, but there are many, many accounts.
How it brings up a super interesting question. How can we disagree more productively? Because you said that you have one of the kindest comment sections on the internet, which to me, I'll believe it when I see it.
Right.
The comment section to me, I tend to exist in a world that's very, everything today has become so polarized, but nutrition in particular, it's like you post about the health benefits of something like red meat, for example, which shouldn't be controversial, but lo and behold, you go to the comments and people can be ruthless.
Yeah.
And so unkind to one another. So yeah, do you have any tips, strategies for making disagreements more productive? I feel like that would be really helpful today.
Yeah, I think, kind of channeling the feeling that you're talking to a real person is really helpful. So, if you have a visceral reaction to something and you feel like you might respond to it in anger, taking a step back and thinking about how can I actually get through to this person? Is there anything that they're saying that I can understand why they're skeptical of my position, why they may not believe what I believe? Acknowledging that and then moving from there. I think, people need their worldview acknowledged before they're going to accept anything that one might say to them. So I think that's exceedingly important. Another thing is terminology. If someone is really knowledgeable about something, you can win them over or lose them within the first seconds if you don't use the right terms. This comes to debates with gun owners, for example. If you call something an assault rifle, that's not an assault, they're going to dismiss you. They're not going to think you know what you're talking about. They're not going to hear what you have to say about, maybe sensible gun legislation. And so I think seeing a person as a person is really important. Also being aware that sometimes it's not a person. Sometimes if you're seeing something that's incredibly divisive and that you're it's just really getting your blood boiling, there is information warfare going on out there. So be conscious of that. And it's maybe not everything's worth engaging with. Maybe look for the people, save that energy for the people who seem to be genuinely curious about learning, who want to know your perspective. And they're out there and they comment. And a lot of times, just the most fantastical content isn't going to get pushed to the top if it's not, doesn't grab your attention right away. These comments that people leave, they also languish. It's if someone's saying something reasonable, I wish I understood why somebody felt this way, is not going to get as much interaction as a real black and white judgment on what is being shared. So it can be very productive if that's something inside of you to want to engage in that way, to look for people who are looking for information in that kind of productive way. And it's an easier foot to set off on, the right foot to set off on.
Yeah. I've had the privilege of getting to meet in person a handful of people who I've had online, social media disagreements with, which have gotten heated at times, but then I've subsequently gotten to meet them in person, whether by chance or an event or whatever. And I always find I've always found those people to be so much more reasonable and open-minded and curious in person as compared to their online like persona. Because I think one of the problems with social media is that you're able to hide behind, a username where there are no real consequences to saying whatever the hell you want. But in reality, everybody that I've ever met, that I've had any of those kinds of interactions with, they're all super sweet in person. In fact, some of them have gone on, we've become friends over time.
Yeah, because there's nothing wrong with disagreeing. And there's nothing wrong with having a debate and to, trade ideas and to hold two opposing viewpoints in your mind. I mean, that's one of the most aspirational things you can do. The problem is when people just want to tune out, they want to get a rise out of someone and then disappear. There's a word for that. It's a troll, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't surprise me that you've had those interactions with people in the real world, because it's a lot harder to look someone in the eye and say something terrible than it is to, look at your thumbs typing out something terrible and then literally move on to the next thing because you're on a platform that's engineered to keep you going and keep you moving. So yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from with those interactions.
Yeah, and another thing that I've found is that a lot of the so-called trolls that you encounter on social media, like, you have to understand to protect your own mental fortitude that many of the people that you're engaging with, or at least a proportion of the people that you're engaging with who appear to be trolls, are potentially suffering from mental health issues, and are not like, we like to project onto people because you see the world not as it is, but as you are. You like to think that the other person, or I think we're inclined to think that the person that we're interacting with is reasonable, just like us, just like we are. But I found that oftentimes it's not actually the case. Like, there are people that are coming from a whole different mental framework.
Yeah, and like, I think
mental illness, neurodivergence. Not that there's anything. I'm not placing any judgment on it, but without those kinds of disclosures, it can be really jarring. At times, interacting with those people, particularly around topics that are polarizing.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of pain out there. That there's a lot of people in a lot of pain, and they find ways to cope with it. And sometimes it's not the most healthy way to cope with it by trying to spread that pain around. I remember an article that we shared about a troll that said something terrible to someone. And then there was a response that got a lot of attention, was, hey, like, are you okay? This sounds like you're really hurting. Like, what's going on with you? Why would, like, I feel like you wouldn't say that unless there's a problem. And so, do you want to talk about it? And, I think a lot of people might say, no, I don't like you and I don't want to talk about it. But this person opened up. And they said, yeah, I just got like a heap of medical bills and I can't pay them and I'm chronically ill and like life is tough. It's really tough, and there was a back and forth. The person apologized. And then people banded together to pay for this guy's medical bills.
Wow.
And that's like just the opportunity to cut through the noise and to be a human being. And that's what's really going on here, right? We already know, I think, through, psychological understandings that the larger a group, the easier it is to dehumanize people and the less focus there is on the individual. And we are existing in systems right now that make it so easy to just be huge groups. So you have to make a really conscious effort to see people as people. And when you do, something really beautiful like that can happen. You could also get hurt in the process. But I think ultimately, doing it as much as possible leads to like growth as an individual and leads to helping people in ways that really matter. And so that's a story that stuck with me a lot.
Yeah. Hurt people hurt people.
That's right.
Yeah, it's so true. So incredibly true.
Loved people love people.
Loved people love people.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do we broaden our, I loved, I think is your Eli Pariser?
Mm-hmm.
He's the he was this is the CEO
he was the founder of
Upworthy.
Yeah, along with Peter Coakley.
I was at the TED conference when he coined the term the filter bubble, which is like a term for, I guess, what has subsequently, I think we've all encountered on social media, is the echo chamber, echo chamber of social media. What are some ways to effectively broaden out our horizons on social media to be exposed to as many, helpful but potentially divergent viewpoints as possible?
I mean, one way to do it is to start anew with an account, follow things you wouldn't normally do on that new account, see what happens as a result, see where, if you kind of create a different psychographic profile of yourself and see what the machine feeds you as a result. Maybe see what it's like to be like, a backpacking enthusiast. If you're, somebody who isn't into that sort of thing, or maybe see what it's like to be a staunch libertarian, see what kind of content they're getting. Even as a social experiment, it's pretty interesting. Ask your friends. Ask people what they're being exposed to that they like, that's making them, feel better about the world or challenging their viewpoints. Because that's another thing is, to be challenged in your viewpoint can be a good feeling if it's done productively. It can be one of the best feelings. And so I think, asking people, what is something that you're following that is helping you grow? And this doesn't even necessarily have to be from like a self-help, or entrepreneurial kind of standpoint. It could be crafting. It could be anything. These are different perspectives. I think people get caught up in thinking a different perspective is just about politics. It's not necessarily. It's what you put your attention to. Sure, it's if all you think about is politics, then a different perspective is a different political viewpoint. But perhaps, all you think about is, you're a carpenter, and you're like, oh, I wonder what it would be like if I were a plumber. Like, I wonder what people are building. Or you're, a photographer, and all the stuff that you're being fed in your algorithm is about, camera settings and camera tricks and, and still stuff. And, but what would it be like if I was being exposed more to different types of visual mediums and creation on that front? I think is a good way to go about it.
Do you have a personal experience or story of kindness that has significantly impacted your life?
Yeah, I have a couple, and one in a very, in a personal way that I view the world and the people around me, and another in like a more professional context. But, speaking personally, I have a story that's in the book, and it's about my kindergarten teacher. And her name was Miss Bean. And she is just lovely, just larger than life in my imagination. Back, of course, I still view her as like a 5-year-old saw her. So in my mind, she's about 20 feet tall. But, we always knew that she was a special teacher. Like even as 5-year-olds, we were like, oh, she got nominated for Disney Teacher of the Year. Did you hear this? But I went in there and I was a bit different as a kid in the sense that I had amblyopia, which is colloquially known as lazy eye. And that's when you have a wandering eye that kind of looks in a different direction. And the way to fix that when your eye muscles are still developing is to put an eye patch over the strong eye so the weak eye's muscles are forced to work and to get stronger. It's a great metaphor for, I think, all sorts of things, I'm sure. And I didn't really think too much of it. And then I showed up in class one day, my first day of kindergarten, actually, and I looked at the kids around me, and I saw that none of them had this eye patch. Because as a 5-year-old, at first you're like, oh, whatever's going on with me, that's probably the way things are, And then I was like, oh, okay, I'm a little different here. I think that this might be a problem. And, I don't know if my parents said something to Miss Bean or if she just picked up on it intuitively. But what she did is she took me and she put me right as everyone, sat in like a semicircle. She stood me up in front of everyone, which was basically the last thing that I wanted to happen at that moment. And she said, "This is Gabriel. His eye is on vacation. Any questions?" Well, class said, "No, that makes sense." And she just had a way to explain things to kids and to put kids at ease. And the lesson that I took away from that was like, not only did it put me at ease, but I think it also addressed something in a way that like a kind adult only can, right? Which is to address something that could turn into bullying or could turn into bad behavior, but instead contextualize it in a way that makes sense to kids. And that's always stuck with me. The lesson that I took away from it was that, there are people out there, because she was a stranger to me at the time, that have your back, and you might not even know it, and be there for you in a moment where you're feeling kind of like vulnerable and support you in a way. So that has changed the way that I view the world. And it has also changed the way in which I try to interact with people, and I don't always do it. I get short and, have a bad temper at times and don't always behave in the way that I would like to. But in general, I try to think about like, okay, is this an opportunity to help people, to help put someone at ease in a moment that might be difficult for them, to consider that they might be going through something that I'm unaware of. And depending on the position that I'm in, I could help. And that exists professionally or, personally. There's always moments like that that come about.
I love that.
Yeah.
Wow. Miss Bean.
Yeah, she was great. It's funny. I was going around. I was at a bookstore the other day, and I was just like, I wonder how they decide what books they put on display in this bookstore. It was just a local bookstore in my neighborhood. And I asked them, they're like, "Oh, you should talk to this woman named BJ. She's the one who runs it." And I was like, I've only known one person who ever had that name, and it was like the mom of a kindergarten classmate. And lo and behold, it was her working that. I hadn't seen her in this long. And I told her, I was like, "I have this book coming out, and there's a story about Miss Bean in it. Can you believe it?" And she's like, "What? Oh my God, I love Miss Bean." Everyone loved her.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, kind of like a weird...
That's so cool, though. Wow, what a story. Yeah, when those kinds of experiences really do, during those formative years, they're so high impact. I don't even know if, as an adult, you realize the impact.
Right.
I just became an uncle. I've got two.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I've got two little nieces. One is 2 years old, just turned 2, and the other is like, I don't know, I think a year or something like that. But it's interesting being cognizant of the fact that like your actions on these children, at that age, are potentially so impactful. So just simple interactions.
Yeah. It's funny though, because it is an outsized interaction with children. Absolutely, because it's modeling. It can profoundly change how they view the world, but it's true with anyone. It's not just kids. There's a great story in this book about a U.S. Army reservist who was, on leave and going back to see his family, and just, really run down and just not feeling great. And he came across a guy at this diner in Texas who told him, who was also a veteran. They kind of connected over that. And asked him how he was getting back home, and basically said, "No, you don't want to go that way. Like, take this route. Take this route." And the guy was wearing a shirt that said "Curly Fries," and on the shirt was, Curly from the Three Stooges with a fork stuck into an electrical socket and just with his hair frizzing up, and that's what drew the person who wrote this story to that individual who made this recommendation initially. But he just recommended a different route to take, and this guy ended up taking that route because of the Curly Fries t-shirt guy, and it ended up changing his perspective on a ton of things just through the enormity of the landscape that he was exposed to, the music that he heard on the radio, not like wasn't like on that road trip he, saved people from a burning car or, whatever. It was just a chance for some solitude and reflection and appreciation of the enormity of life and everything. And then that became something that he could rely on throughout his life, that interaction. And because of this person, they never saw each other again. This person will never know that having that one little interaction and making that recommendation, that moment of human connection to be like, hey, you know what? You might appreciate going this way instead of that way. What kind of effect that had on this person. And, he experienced a lot of trauma later on in his life, but this interaction provided a well of support that he could go back to think about the beauty in the world, to think about the kindness of people, to remember, the connection that is there waiting for you. And, that story, and I say this about a lot of the stories that we've gathered over time, so many of them, even when they were just short sentences in the comment section, they would stick with me, and I would find myself thinking about them. And that really stuck with me, the idea that any interaction that you have with someone at any moment could be something that they remember for the rest of their lives, even if it seems kind of banal in the moment. And I think it's nice to think about the potential profundity of that, that by talking to someone, helping them in a moment, connecting, that it might be something that changes how they view the world.
Yeah. Are you, I'm definitely, I can get pessimistic at times on social media, looking at the just observing the discourse. I mean, right now it's largely politics. It's gotten so inflamed. The temperature, as they say, has gotten so heated that people on either side of the aisle will point to their counterparts on the opposite side and wage really hateful, hurtful insults, against others. And it's just so odd to me. We're all Americans. We're all here with the intent of making, our union as strong and, I think, inclusive and prosperous for each other. But nonetheless, it's like, if you don't have the same political beliefs as somebody else that you're interacting with on social media, suddenly you're a Nazi. It's just gotten really bad. So at times I can be really pessimistic. Like I don't necessarily see that it's getting any better from my vantage point. If anything, it's getting worse over time. Are you optimistic? Are you,
Yeah, I mean, I have those. Take? I have those same impulses, and I think some people, not everyone in my life knows that I built at Upworthy, and so sometimes when they find out about that, they're like, "Wait, you can be a little bit of a curmudgeon or pessimistic sometimes, just like anybody, But I think it's interesting when you talk about being pessimistic, because it's an opportunity to analyze where that's coming from a bit. And I think about there is a term called mean world syndrome. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
So this was a term coined by a media professor and communications scholar, George Gerbner, in the 1970s. And basically what the mean world syndrome posits is that repeated exposure to, pessimistic content, violent content, changes how you view the world. That you start viewing things in a more negative light. You start, basically, it increases feelings of anxiety and fear and distrust, and that extends to your worldview and how you view people. And I think we inherently, I don't know how well this has been tested, but it feels like one of those things that it feels right. The amount of media that you're consuming about one thing is going to influence your worldview. And we're exposed to a lot of that all the time. And so those feelings of distrust get heightened. But I think this ties together a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, which is, well, how much of that pessimism and feeling of distrust is coming through the narratives that you're seeing, through a screen, through the airwaves? And how much is it coming from the conversations you're having with actual people face to face? Not everyone is going to be productive, but you're probably going to have a hell of a lot more that leave you feeling better, even if somebody it's very unlikely that you're going to have a conversation with somebody who has a different political opinion than you, and they are just going to immediately start calling you a Nazi to your face. But online, yeah, it's true. I mean, that sort of thing does happen. And so, what I've been wondering and what, I've been working at is like, well, is the converse true? If it's true that, a pessimistic view of the world leads to being more distrustful of people, can an optimistic vision of the world, can examples of joy and laughter and, shared connection and people helping each other, can it lead to a view of a world in which we trust people more and leave you feeling good about humanity? And obviously, my position is yes, I think that is true. I think people feel that way after they consume stuff that feels good. And in fact, we did a survey where we asked our audience once, like, how do you feel when you come across us? And, it was pretty interesting, the amount of people that responded, and it was 90% of people said that they were more optimistic. 95% of people said that they felt more likely to do good in the world. 98% of people just said they felt better overall. That's like pretty dramatic numbers. And when I think about that, the difference between how you might answer that if you're being exposed to the pessimistic view of humanity, you're probably not going to feel inspired to do good in the world. And I think that's the crux of the issue here, is like, what is the stuff that we're putting out there that's going to make people feel better? Because if you feel better, you're more likely to do good. And if you're more likely to do good, there's a bigger possibility that we can solve some of these very real problems that we're faced with. But it's very difficult to feel motivated to tackle the real issues that humanity is faced with if you're feeling ground down by the narrative, or feeling like it's not worth preserving. So yes, I mean, I do feel pessimistic at times, just like anyone else, but I try to take a stock of where that feeling is coming from, because I think it's not always reflective of the reality of our communications person to person.
It's so true. You've reminded me of this study have you ever heard of the wobbly furniture study?
It's ringing a bell, but
okay. So this will be really actually good for you to use, because I mean, it's one of my favorite studies in the field of psychology. And it says a lot. It speaks to exactly what you're talking about. Where they took a bunch of people and they randomized them to either sit at a table that was on solid footing or a table that was wobbly. When you get to sit down at a restaurant, sometimes the table's wobbly.
Yeah.
So they randomized people to sit at either a wobbly or a table that was that was not wobbly, that was on solid footing. And they showed them pictures of celebrity couples. And they asked the people to predict what they thought, the outcomes of those relationships. Like if they thought they were going to last a long time, if they thought that they were going to be short-lived, what have you. And what they found was that on average, those that were seated, when people were seated at the wobbly table, they projected instability onto the relationships that they were opining on. And which you didn't see when they were sitting at the table that wasn't wobbly. Which is super interesting because, we don't consider how our environments shape our thoughts. We obviously shape our environments, but our environments return the favor. Our environments shape us back.
Right.
And it might not, and it's not necessarily the physical environment. It could be the information environment. It could be potentially the food environment. There
right.
are all these other variables that that I think might be playing a role here when it comes to our outlook on things. So you're so right.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think we are the inflection point through which it passes. We see the world a certain way, and it's not like it could only exist in the digital world and not in the real world, that narrative about things. But if it's true, the mean world syndrome, if you see, the more negative things that you see, the worse outlook that you're going to have, well, there's the chance for transference, right? All of a sudden, if you think people are not trustful, you're going to start engaging in the world and engaging with people in that way, potentially, right? And then it makes the leap from a narrative to reality, right? It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy at scale. If enough people feel that way, and then their behavior changes, and then, it shapes the world around everyone. And so that's why I think the stakes are so high to change the narrative about humanity, to believe in goodness, to see it, for us all to do, the work that we can to put things out there that prove that people are good. And I'm not saying that it's all like everything is sunshine and roses. It's obviously not. There are very real problems and difficult things happening, but both are true. There's difficult things, and there is a lot of beautiful stuff happening, and you can't let one narrative override the other. And I think right now it's tilted way further in one direction because we might be sitting at the wobbly table of the media, social media, technological environment. It's an interesting way to frame things. I like that analogy, and I will be using it for that study.
Yeah. Take it. Well, Upworthy has certainly done a great job of helping to surface positive and uplifting stories. If there were one key message that readers were to take away from reading Good People, what do you hope that to be?
I think the key message that I would want people to take away is that there is a lot of good around you, and that there's a lot of good inside of you. And that the key to unlocking that is to remember it. The stories, the prompts that we shared that gathered these stories, take some time to think about what your answers to them are. What's a time that you experienced kindness from a stranger? Who's a teacher who changed your life? These moments that reinforce your belief that there is goodness in the world. And to rely on that when you might feel it being challenged during times that can be very challenging. And this book is a resource for that, So I think it's important to do that work yourself. But I think it's also nice to have a resource that's just full of examples from all walks of life, from people all over the world, in big ways and small, to turn to when you're like, I need a reminder. I need a reminder that, humanity is a benevolent force. So that's what I'd want people to take away from this, is a feeling that this is a tool and a resource for comfort, and that it exists in this book, but it also exists inside of yourself and the experiences that you've had throughout your life.
It kind of sounds like a secular Bible.
I mean, there is definitely a secular humanism to it all. It's funny when you talk about, the information overload, for example. And, part of that is like we're exposed to so much information about things happening that we have very little agency over, right? And that can lead to feelings of powerlessness and hopelessness. If you're like, there's all this bad stuff happening and I don't have the power to change it. I keep getting exposed to it. And it's because, to a certain extent, the larger the sphere of information that you're exposed to, the less, the further away something is, the less direct control you may have over it. The closer it is, the more direct control you may have over it. And the link to, the secular humanism about it is, perhaps the thing that you have the most control over, the most agency, is how you treat every person that you come across. This is something that's not dictated by an algorithm, not dictated by politicians, not run by whatever accounts that you're following or talking heads that are there. This is a decision that everyone gets to make in every moment that they're alive and interacting with people. So that's not a new thought, right? That is like the basis of a lot of, religions, which is treat people how you'd like to be treated. It's not revolutionary, but it's quite profound. And, I am not religious in the traditional sense by any means, but I do believe in people, and I believe in their ability to help each other, and that they have goodness inside of them that can make just all the difference in the world. And I don't think it's a small thing, because I think, those small changes in how we interact with each other at scale can cause profound changes to the systems at work and the things that we need to solve, because we'll be coming at them from a place where we feel energized and that we're fighting for something that's worth preserving, which I think, is certainly the case.
Yeah. Reminds me of one of my favorite quotes of all time by David Mitchell, who wrote the book Cloud Atlas, which of course became a movie, one of my favorite movies. The line is, "I am but one drop in a limitless ocean, yet what is any ocean but a multitude of drops?" For people doubting their agency in the world. It's those small acts of kindness that ultimately yield big rewards, particularly at scale, particularly when, it's a powerful thought. It's a powerful thought and a very empowering one. So I definitely appreciate that's a message that you're advancing. What's the format of the book? Is it all just the stories that you've collected? Is there a workbook aspect to it?
The format is 101 short stories of varying lengths. And then there are short little snippets in there, I think about like 50 of them or so, that are taken directly from the commons as kind of an homage to, where these stories started as. But there isn't a workbook component in it, which is probably something I should think of, because I know Amazon will probably populate with 10 of those the moment the book comes out. But there is, work to be done that people can partake in that further the kind of themes that are in this book. With this being, one tool to engage in the world in maybe a more productive way, and to engage with people in a kinder way.
Love it. Well, we need that now more than ever. So thanks for writing it. Where can people find it? Where can people buy it? Where can they connect with you on the socials?
This book, Good People, Stories from the Best of Humanity, is available September 3rd. It'll be from booksellers everywhere and online. And you can find us at Upworthy on all the social accounts, and upworthy.com for our wonderful editorial offerings.
Dope. Well, last question that gets asked to everybody on the show. What does living a genius life mean to you?
It is a good question, and I knew this was coming, strangely, because I listened to your podcast.
Love it.
But, I think that it is really introspection and taking stock of how you are reacting to things in the world, and taking a moment to understand it, to know thyself, right? It's a lifelong process. And I think that leads to really important results if you pursue it over time, both in terms of bettering yourself as a human being and learning and developing and sharing things that can improve people's lives as a whole. So, what's the old saying? The unexamined life is not worth living, right? And I think, people will find elements of genius inside themselves if they're dedicated to unearthing them.
Yes. Yeah, you have to look for it.
That's right.
Yeah, I definitely believe that everybody has genius inside of them. Thanks for coming out. This was super fun. Shout out to Miss Bean.
Yeah, Miss Bean. Big shout out.
Big shout out.
Profound effect on my life. And thank you so much, Max. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.